All right, here we are. It's Thursday once again. We wanted to continue some of the concepts that we had in the last video. This is going to start kind of its own new series since we just kind of finished up some of our gaming retrospectives in PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 2. We're going to jump into one of our silly concepts that we always talk about, but it kind of stems from this one idea called Hoosier main. And the two of us, we've coined the gamer astrology and gamer personality tests of who's your main and how you have that like initial thought. I'm here with Anthony, of course.
How's it going? You're going to hear me coughing all the time in the background. Sorry about that.
Right, we're both very sick. We're not going to miss because hell yeah. So what's important here is neither of us are experts on the things that we're going to talk about. These are just our opinions. This is for fun. But we still would love to hear comments and thoughts about this because we've talked about it for as long as we can remember. I mean, it really kind of probably between the two of us has stemmed originally from Dungeons and Dragons when we played in high school to now. It's then fractured off into the other games that we had started playing together.
You guys kind of introduced this to me, which is the idea of a main, the idea of kind of like locking one thing down and really hyper focusing on it and getting better at it, improving your skill with one character. But even beyond that, I think just being recognizing the pattern of, oh, hey, wow, we kind of gravitate towards the same type of people in every type of game. And then we just kind of wanted to point that out and go through and list some of our favorites.
Where we really started thinking about this was when we started playing specifically for you and I, because I remember it was maybe 6 years ago when we were playing Soul Calibur 6 in the evening, and we were trying to like break down some of these ideas because we were trying to get better at that game, I remember. But it really kind of comes from the fighting games. And I kind of want to just like go back and think about the fighting games that kind of got me here, and then I kind of wanted you to talk about that. But we can throw in other games too, anything that you can think of, because I've got a couple in mind that are not fighting games, but kind of came from that genre, I think. I don't know. So for me, the first fighting game that I can remember playing was an NES game. I didn't play it at an arcade. Once again, we were not arcade people. It was Double Dragon on the NES. And that title theme song is burned into my mind ever since I was a kid. But it had a fighting game 2-player version. So you could play the 1-player version and just do the side-scroller beat 'em up that it was. And it had fighting game like inputs. You could do this like one-on-one thing, and it had all kinds of stuff. You could throw the knives at each other. There was different moves. It wasn't a 2D fighter like Street Fighter. You could move up and down and back and forth. And on an NES game, before I even understood fighting games, I think that was crazy.
That's a very innovative concept for for a fight, especially back then.
Right. That game didn't really have like different archetypes then. And I didn't really have any reference for it then. And it wasn't until we picked up a different game on the SNES, which was Final Fight. And that game I know came from other kinds of fighting games. Once again, it was an arcade game, but it actually did have different fighting styles. So you could play a 2-player on the SNES. And you could play as Hagar, and I can't remember, Cody, I think it was his name. And I always liked to pick Hagar. And back then, I just liked the bigger guy. And then came Street Fighter Alpha that we picked up on our Super Nintendo. That was another fighting game where now we're picking guys. And, I wouldn't be allowed to play Ryu. My older brother was picking him. I couldn't play Ken. My younger brother was playing him. So I had to find a fighter within there, and I just grabbed Guile. Or actually, it wasn't Guile. It was Charlie on that game. But I knew of Guile, and I thought he was really cool. But that was kind of like my intro to that idea. Well, what was your first like intro to those kind of concepts?
Yeah, so we kind of talked about this earlier, but you guys kind of went down the Nintendo path. I kind of went down the Sega path. And the first real interaction I had with a fighting game was actually a Power Rangers game for the Sega Genesis. And you obviously could pick between the Power Rangers, but then you could also pick between the monsters, the bad guys, which I thought was incredibly cool. Obviously attracted to that style instantly, But I think one thing that really stood out to me was, so let's say you were playing as Goldar, let's say, for example. Well, Goldar could fight the Power Rangers, but then if your opponent picked, say, the Dragon Zord, well, Goldar would buff up and become, kind of a kaiju size Goldar, and then they would fight in that size. So it was really cool, kind of the scale of the game where you could have these really intimate one-on-one fights, and then also kind of have those exploded out. Obviously it's still a side scroller 1v1, but now instead of fighting on a street corner, now you're fighting inside of the entire city. So for me, that was kind of my first introduction. And like you said, you kind of had to pick based off of who your favorite Power Ranger was. And unfortunately, the Green Ranger was a unlockable character who I could not get because I was not good enough at the game. And so you kind of had to work around those limitations.
That sparked some memories here for me. And furthering that idea, your favorite character was the Green Ranger. And I think that's a really important concept here of who your favorite is, and really kind of pushing our idea of it's a personality test. So Green Ranger, who knows how he fought, but just your personality saying that you like the Green Ranger would then force you into this fighting style. And so there was another game that actually was on the Super Nintendo, but I don't think ever came to the States. But I played it on an emulator in maybe high school because it was really popular to do that then. And I think you've played it, Dragon Ball Z Hyperdimension.
Yeah, those old games, especially old Dragon Ball games, maybe they weren't the highest quality necessarily, but yeah, I think kind of like you said, it was more about the image recognition. Dragon Ball. I just wanted to get my hands on all of those games, but yeah, I definitely remember those old games.
Who was your fighter in that game?
Well, so it's obviously changed now, but back then I was a huge Vegeta fan. Still am, but back then that was who I would pick every single time. Locking in Vegeta. If I couldn't get him, I would get Gotenks, and obviously he wasn't in those games, but yeah, Vegeta was just again something about that playing the villain, playing the bad guy turned good. That really appealed to me.
Which obviously is really funny because Piccolo is another one of those characters that Goku turned into a good character. But I was a big fan of that kind of a character in any story is the Vegeta. So I was always locking in on Vegeta too. And in Hyperdimension. So that's kind of funny. I didn't know that you also played Vegeta in that game back then. So that concept pushed further for us when we had our Game Boys. And me and my younger brother, we had picked up two Game Boy games. And we had a Super Game Boy that we could plug into our Super Nintendo at the time so that you could play it on the bigger screen. And you could play it 2-player. Because it was a link cable game, but you could play it 2-player on the Super Game Boy, which was really cool. And it was King of Fighters 95 and then Battle Arena Toshinden for the Game Boy. And that was when we really started picking out characters that we liked. I played Ryo in King of Fighters. I don't know why. I think because I just wanted to be one of those Ryu types, and my brothers didn't have time to pick him before me. And then in Battle Arena Toshinden, I picked Duke. The guy with the big sword and the long hair. I thought that was really cool. And he was a bit of a slower fighter, and that's when I really started to kind of move towards a fighter that I think, I don't know what they call them, maybe charge types. I think that was already where I was going, where super armor and you're just hitting super damn hard at the right moment. That's where that really started for me. And I think you've talked about Battle Arena Toshinden in the past, but I don't think you and I have ever really talked about that game. Did you play either King of Fighters or Battle Arena?
I didn't play Battle Arena on the Game Boy. I played the PlayStation 1 version of that. But King of Fighters, and again, I didn't play it on the Game Boy. This was actually, I think it might have been a compilation game on maybe an Xbox, I want to say, where it was SNK versus Capcom, kind of a compilation of all characters. I had never played King of Fighters growing up, and this would have been in my teens. But you're right. I think the King of Fighters character line, obviously Street Fighter was kind of the more popular where we were fighting game. And so seeing those characters, that was very exciting and new, and you could see kind of the inspiration from both sides of, where they pulled from each other. But yeah, so I never played King of Fighters 95 on the Game Boy, but on Battle Arena Toshinden, I did play, I want to say his name was Foe, the old man with the tiger claws.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. He had like a big long bushy white beard, had a black and white gi, had tiger claws that came out of his hands, and he shot a fireball below him that he would roll around and attack with. And kind of like what you said, you had alluded to the fact that you're kind of drawn to these bigger guys, the rushdown guys, the charge guys. I was always of the mindset, and again, I didn't didn't really know this until I got older, and I kind of hearing it from someone else, I kind of realized, oh yeah, that is kind of my rationale, my thinking, which is if I can't be better than you, then I want to be different from you. So if you're playing Ryu and I'm playing Ryu, you're going to beat me because you have experience. Well, if you're playing Ryu and I come out and play as Dan, now all of a sudden you don't know my moveset because even though we're both technically Shotos, Dan is obviously essentially a joke character, but you don't know my moves. So now I can do things kind of freely. I think one of the things we're probably going to touch on later is I think fighting games especially, we want to find patterns when we're fighting. And when you can't find my patterns because you haven't fought me 1,000 times, that makes my character feel more powerful to me. And so, yeah. So for Battle Arena Toshinden, I want to say his name was Foe. I'm not 100% sold on if that's correct or not, but yeah, I remember Battle Arena Toshinden especially. That kind of became a mainstay in our friend group.
I remember that specifically because, my younger brother would come home after hanging out with you and he would talk about that game. And all I could ever think of was the Game Boy game. And I'm like, why are they sitting around playing Super Nintendo? That's weird. Because we didn't ever buy the game for the PlayStation or anything. I don't know. We kind of fell out of it. I'm not sure why. But to further more those ideas, I think it's really funny when you play a fighting game. We're talking fighting games right now. But when you play a fighting game and say you're just playing the one fighting game and everybody that you know is playing that one. And I think there's something to say about when everybody sits down and starts locking in their characters, you immediately start judging them based on the character that they picked. Because if you have a lot of language, so to speak, in that game, then you can immediately start forming an opinion about that person based on the character they picked. Now, whether that be they picked, because the concept of tier list didn't really even come into play for me. I didn't understand. I don't know if it had started before that. I've not done a lot of research prior to this, but tier lists really started coming in for us and for me in high school in Super Smash Bros. Melee, because we really started getting those forums and things where people were talking, and then people were starting to make tier lists and say this character is the best, this character is not the best, and that never made too much sense to me. I didn't really think about that when I played a fighting game, and Melee was probably the one. Super Smash Bros. Melee on the GameCube, was the one game that I'd put a lot of time into at that time. And I always just thought every character would be good as long as you took the time to get good with them and their different movesets and play styles. That's all that mattered. I didn't think, a certain character's movesets made them superior to another character, but maybe a character could be more appealing because they're easier to wield than others.
You kind of mentioned something earlier about how, when you have knowledge of the game and somebody picks someone, you kind of get a real feel for what you're saying. And kind of looking back to go forward, that Battle Arena Toshinden game on the PlayStation 1 version, the main antagonist of the game, the final boss of the game, he used a gun. And so if you sat down next to me and you picked the guy who had a gun in a sword fighting game, I instantly knew, what type of band you were. It was a kind of like you said, that kind of expanded into everything that we played, So if you sit down and you play Super Smash Brothers and you're picking a character based off of a tier list as opposed to, well, this is a character that I enjoy. I think that kind of tells you exactly what you need to know about a person. Maybe they're ultra competitive. Maybe they're taking, at least for me, it always felt like, well, it's not necessarily that you're taking an easy way or anything like that. But like I said, I wanted to be different. I wanted my character to be something that you hadn't practiced against so that when you fought me, that was the only time you would ever see it. And so in Melee, that was kind of the first time that I really started playing as Dr. Mario and Bowser and kind of those more off-meta picks, kind of like you said. And so I really wanted it to be when you were fighting against my character, and then whoever got up and left, and then you went to go play someone else. You weren't also learning about my character when you were fighting someone else. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. And you had kind of mentioned about your brothers kind of forcing that out of habit, whereas I normally played by myself. So really, I had pick of the litter. I could pick whoever I wanted, and it was more when I got together with you guys, with the friend group, that's when it became more of, okay, that's his guy. This is going to be my guy, and that's Jared's guy, and all of that stuff.
Yeah, really just locking down a character. That really was much more apparent after the first Smash Brothers, which me and my brothers, any game that we could play 4-player was crazy, and each of us had a character in that game, which was really different. Like we had never, like the big broad fighters in Street Fighter or something. There's a big broad list of fighters, and you could pick all kinds of guys. But that game was much harder to play, and we liked fighting games because I don't know, we just did. When we switched to Melee, it was with Melee was the first one where they really just had like every fighter felt totally different, but had the same like button presses. And I found that to be a much easier way to express yourself as a player and be able to be like, okay, I really like the way this guy fights, but I also like the way this guy looks. Or I like the way this guy looks. I'm terrible at fighting with him. So I'm not going to play him that often. And, you know, we have these emotions and feelings attached to these characters in Super Smash Brothers. And I think that plays a pretty big role. But when you would sit down to play a different fighting game that you'd never played before, so like when we played Tekken, we would play all of them at first. Like me and my brothers would go through every single character to see how they were. And then we would pick a guy based on that. Like we would take turns beating the game to see how their story was and how they fought and what was easier and what was not. Then we would lock in a character, and I could always tell which characters my brothers were going to pick after going through them. Again, it's just it furthered my ideas or my own personal opinions about, you know, you sit down, you picked Marth. Do you like Fire Emblem? No? Oh, you just like him because he's a tier 1. Okay. I gotcha. And then I knew whether or not to lean forward or sit back.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I definitely think and I think the other thing too, as much as it tried to be a party game, I think the thing that you hit, you know, right away is Smash Brothers was the ultimate equalizer. You know, if I hand you a controller and we're both playing Street Fighter, and I know the combos and you don't, I just keep winning. You know, there's no coming back from that. I know the moves, you don't. You can spam the buttons, you can button mash, but I know the game on a level that you don't. Whereas if you sit down next to me and we're playing Smash Brothers and every character has the same buttons, you know, B is your smash attacks, A are your light attacks, and, you know, jumping and aerial attacks and all of that stuff. Here's your shield, here's your recovery options, and then all of that. I feel like because it was so simple, it allowed much more creativity from that, you know? So like you said, it's like, okay, two people could play the same character, but they would play those two characters vastly different because one person is much more creative and one more person is more analytical, or the one that I always associate it with is kind of that old school karate movie, you know, mind, body, soul. Are you a thinker? Are you a strategist? Are you more of I'm going to beat you down because, you know, I'm better than you, I'm stronger than you, I've practiced more than you? Or are you going to just be, I mean, your brother personifies this, you know, you and all of your brothers really personify this is, I'm going to beat you because in my soul, I know that I'm going to win. Like I will not allow myself to lose. And so, I mean, I think that's why I love playing fighting games against you guys so much, is just that, like, that raw emotion, that like I'm going to will this victory out of nothingness.
The way that me and my brothers used to play fighting games is the only HP point that mattered was the last one. So yeah. Like we never would break until the HP was gone. And then it'd be like, I'll fight you again. You know, like again, like fight me again. And I'm not going to stop fighting until either we have to go break for dinner or you just say you're done. And that's still not a victory because you just left. I need you to sit back down. Like you don't get to leave until I win. That's how we played.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we ever actually played Tekken with your family or with that friend group that we kind of had. But you're right. I think that was Tekken 2. I want to say was my experience, but that was really the first time where, to me, that felt like a competitive fighting game. It was just very tight. It felt good. And you kind of mentioned you go through the roster, and I think there's somebody for everyone. And then the flip side of that is, you know, there's also different fighting styles for everyone. You know, if I want to be a grappler or a rushdown or anything like that, that game had that.
Another thing I just now was thinking about was the difference between all these fighting games that we're talking about. I never really thought about it until, well, maybe right now, or maybe just I want to articulate it now. But those older fighting games like Street Fighter and things were products of their time, but those button inputs and the cult following that had come from it was so ingrained, like they couldn't change the way that fighting game worked. But then we got games like Virtual Fighter and Tekken and even Soul Calibur, where they became I think they're called arena fighters, where you can move around like in a 3D space rather than back and forth. And the button inputs had to be a lot different. And I don't know, I used to judge a fighting game on whether or not it was a Street Fighter clone or if it was its own thing. And then after that, how intuitive was the buttons to create combos? Because I never found it very intuitive to play a Street Fighter game or a game like it, like King of Fighters or Battle Arena or Guilty Gear or I can't think of the other one that I want to say. But I don't know, because then games came along like Bloody Roar and really the Budokai series, and then later the Tenkaichi series. But I hadn't really thought about that until now. I mean, what do you think about that? About the intuitive nature of that and how it calls you into the game and calls you into that character based on that intuition and that ease of play?
I think you hit it the right again, where one of the reasons that I think Dragon Ball Z Budokai are some of the best fighting games of all time are because it really felt like, with Melee, it was everybody's movesets are the same. With Budokai, everyone's movesets started the same, and then you expanded or contracted with each character. And so for me, it was, okay, now not only do we have the simplicity of, combos being only the face buttons, we're not doing any kind of directional inputs, it's only the face buttons. But then on top of that, you have the uniqueness of each character. And so you have, my character is not only unique because it's the character that I chose, my character is unique because of the combos that only I can do, that only I practiced. Yeah, and I agree 100%. I think simplicity, it's difficult to explain because in Soul Calibur 6, it's very complex, right? The inputs are very complex from character to character. Whereas Dragon Ball Z Budokai, they're very simplistic, but the overall tactics and scheme of the game are very complex. And so it's really just kind of what you prefer. Do you prefer very precise manual inputs, or do you prefer strategy and movement and thinking about where you are on the space of the arena, like you said? So yeah, for me, Dragon Ball Z Budokai is one of my favorite games of all time. I really feel like those games were the first time where I locked in on those games. I mean, I honed it down to a science to where I could beat I really felt like I could beat anybody in those games.
And to gush more about the Budokai series, just because I loved it, as far as fighting games go, it didn't feel too bad to lose. It felt pretty okay. It felt pretty forgiving. It always felt like we could just go again. No big deal. I lost that one. Okay.
I stole this from Ben Brode. He's the designer of Hearthstone. He used to work for Blizzard. It's very important when the game is over what displays on the screen. So if it says you lose, it feels bad. Like I don't like that feeling. If at the end of the game the world blows up, it's not I lost. It's like, oh, well, that attack it beat everybody. Like I think Dragon Ball Z did such a good job of, it's not that I won and you lost. It's that we destroyed the planet that we were fighting on and the fight is over. You know what I mean? There's nothing left to fight now that we've done this.
That was the other thing that I really liked about the Budokai series, which I know wasn't the first game that had arena destruction and just the spectacle. I mean, some of the first spectacles that I saw and the first arena destruction that I saw happened in Mortal Kombat. Those games weren't as influential to me as the Dragon Ball Z Budokai games, and especially 3. 3 was just amazing. It was just such a good game. I never could get into the Tenkaichi series, mostly because it always felt like a one-player game the way that they did the camera. I think it was a very dynamic way to do it, but the original Budokai 3 and 1 through 3, the camera setup always felt equally important for both characters on screen. And I know it was a very traditional appearance, and maybe they just really wanted to create their own thing. But I know a series that kind of mimicked it and felt even better as far as capturing like what it feels like to watch these shows that we watch, these anime. Of course, we've not really talked about our passions in anime, and they're very old man passions, because nowadays there's just different shonen. Everybody's got their shonen. That's a separate topic, but the the Naruto Ninja Storm series. And you and I had recently Ultimate Ninja Storm, excuse me. And you and I had recently started a stint in those games, but we stopped on the second one, I think. You and I were 100%ing the games as we went through them. And I can't remember why we got sidetracked. But there was another game that had a lot of expression and a lot of interesting ways to play characters, and the characters all felt very unique and fun to play. And I mean, Naruto already has a lot of self-expression within their characters, and so you're going to identify with a character if you watch it. And this could be totally missing the mark on younger crowds listening or people who didn't like Naruto, but I don't know. I think there was something to think about there as far as characters.
I think the things that stood out to me, and I'm gushing on Dragon Ball Z here, but I think the things that stood out to me in kind of those shonen games is how fun is it to play defense, right? So if I'm getting hit by your combo, how do I get out of it? I think something as simple as just having, it's like I press a button, I teleport out of your combo, and a little wooden log is there. That stood out to me in the Ultimate Ninja Storm games, was just how fun it was to play defense. I always felt like I was in control of the character. I could do what I wanted to do. Obviously, you have the powerful ninjutsus and all of that stuff, and whoever you're playing as has different specialties and what they can do and what they're good at. But everybody always felt so fun to play on defense, to where it's like, oh, I'm backed up. Don't hit me. Don't hit me. And then bam, you hit the counter, and it's like I've got it. Now I'm on offense. The transition from offense to defense was so fast and fluid, and it really felt like those games prioritized fast play. So. We talked about earlier about like rushdown characters and all of that. Those games always feel like every character is that. And then it's like, what do you also want on top of that ability?
There's something to think there too. Oh my gosh. Well, we've kind of, and I'm okay with going further into this fighting game topic, but because I just really like it. But these characters and this rushdown that you're talking about, like those wouldn't work in traditional fighting games where there was a wall. So it was side scrolling, and then you would pin somebody to the wall. And that always felt so, like, why does it have to keep going that? Like, why can't we just there's no wall, you just keep going? Well, they had all this tradition there. But as they made newer games, they could break out of those traditions, and then we could get arenas like you could fall off, or like you said, the comeback mechanics were much more interesting, and then you get that kind of conversation with the other fighter, the other person that you're playing with. So you'd have those like psychological moments where you're pressing them against the wall, but then they could flip over and knock you back into the wall just as easy as you could press them into it. And that felt better. I was going to say more realistic, but obviously I've never been in a fucking fight, so been trying to keep an eye on our time here. I think we got a few more minutes here to kind of continue, at least on the fighting game front, if you have any other ideas, Dad. I think, there was one that we were talking about right before we got in here, and it was one that I beat and practiced to try to get ready to play with you and my younger brother, and you brought it up, Injustice, Gods Among Men. And I think that's a really interesting fighting game, as far as you can easily pick your fighter based on your favorite superhero, and they're gonna work probably in a way that fits your personality type and that character's personality type. Just like if you like Batman and gadgets, you're probably already someone who's good at zoning, because you're well, you remember playing with Lemon. I mean, he was pretty good with Batman, and he's a pretty intelligent guy. And I kind of like the Flash because you rush him down. But I don't know. I think you had some words on that before, and I was like, hey, hold on.
Yeah, I think those games, especially, like you said, I think you're first drawn to the superhero that you like, but then I think the fighting style that you like also very comfortably fits with that character, if that makes sense. So, you were talking about your picks. I think for me, when I played those games, even though I didn't necessarily like the character in comics, playing those games as Sinestro was very fun for me because, like you said, he had all of these really cool abilities. He had the abilities that Hal Jordan had, but at the same time, he also had these really cool offensive abilities that were just very fun to use. You'd mentioned zoning, and being able to attack somebody from the entire screen if you wanted and not move in at all is an incredibly fun playstyle for me. Yeah, I think those games, especially the Injustice 2 was especially degenerate with Harley Quinn and just being able to, it was essentially Yoshimitsu from Soul Calibur, where you have the different stances, where I'm going to hit you low, I'm going to hit you mid, or I'm going to hit you high, and you have no idea which one I'm going to do. You just guess. Then, then I find it's a 50-50 matchup, and either I win or you win. Here we go. Let's just see whose stance wins.
That's funny that you say Sinestro, because I didn't actually get to play that game with you, but I fucking could have guessed that would have been a character that you would have played. And that's what I'm talking about. Like, I can look at that list. You could probably have guessed which character I would be attracted to in that game, which you already knew which character I was attracted to in the second one, because I think I made it pretty damn clear. That's kind of the things that we were talking about, and kind of the idea is, like, you sit down with your friends, and these could be people that you've played with for years, and you get the new game that's got options and choices, and you already know what your friends are going to pick. You know what they're attracted to. It's almost like a personality type. It's the gamer astrology, Like, oh well, you seem like you're a Sinestro player. Well, you're not going to mix well with that Batman player over there. You guys shouldn't date.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think as far as the ideas that we're talking about in fighting games in general, I'd say we could probably wrap this particular episode up and can pick it back up next time, unless you have any further thoughts.
No, I think we kind of rolled through the list there. That was actually pretty quick and smooth.
So join us for the next one. We're going to be continuing some of these ideas. So yeah, thanks for stopping in.
See you.